21 seconds. That's all it took for Jasmine Crockett to drag Donald Trump into the ugliest scandal the Senate has ever seen. In one breath, she linked him to Jeffrey Epstein, to Princess Diana, and to a predatory game of power the public was never supposed to hear about. The chamber erupted, senators shouting, aides frozen, cameras locked on Trump's face as his confidence bled away. If this is the truth America saw on live TV, what's the truth they're still hiding from you? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The red on-air light blinked to life above the U.S. Senate chamber, and a hush fell like a guillotine blade. Millions of Americans were watching, though the people inside the room barely breathed. Jasmine Crockett sat forward, her hands resting on a slim stack of papers she hadn't touched all morning. She didn't clear her throat, didn't shuffle, didn't warm up. Her eyes locked on Donald Trump as if there was no one else alive in the room. And then, without a hint of ceremony, she fired the shot. "Mr. Trump," her voice cut through the chamber like a shard of glass, "did you or did you not boast that you could sleep with Princess Diana without hesitation?" The word seemed to hang in the air, suspended by the collective gasp that followed. A rustle rippled through the gallery, the sound of disbelief colliding with shock. C-SPAN's cameras zoomed in on Trump's face, catching the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. MAGA loyalists in the room leaned back in their seats with cocky smiles, confident their man could swat this away. Across the aisle, Democrats shifted forward, like predators scenting fresh blood. Jasmine didn't blink. The moment was hers, and she wasn't letting it go. Trump's eyes flicked to the cameras, then back to Jasmine. A smirk crept across his lips, not the easy grin of a man at ease, but the defensive curl of someone cornered and pretending not to feel the walls closing in. He said nothing. His silence wasn't empty. It pulsed. Every second he stayed quiet was a second where the entire country was asking the same question Jasmine had just lobbed into the air. From somewhere in the press gallery, a camera shutter snapped 3 times in quick succession, each click echoing louder than the Senate gavel ever could. The split-screen feed on every news network told its own story. On one side, Trump's still, guarded expression. On the other, Jasmine's steady, unflinching stare. Behind her eyes, the unspoken promise. There was more, much more. She knew what she was doing. You don't open with your knockout punch unless you have another one ready. The audience at home didn't know whether to expect an answer, an explosion, or a meltdown. That was exactly where Jasmine wanted them, leaning forward, not daring to look away. The chair of the committee shifted uncomfortably, as if debating whether to intervene, but Jasmine didn't release the floor. Her silence now matched Trump's, a deliberate countermeasure, making the space between question and answer stretch thin as wire. Somewhere deep in the chamber, a phone vibrated against a desk, a muffled reminder that the outside world was already reacting. Jasmine could almost feel the hashtags birthing themselves in real time. And still, Trump smirked. Still, he said nothing. Still, the tension climbed like a slow-burn fuse. Why won't he answer? Jasmine's hand hovered over the console, her gaze never leaving Trump. Then, with a single deliberate press, the speakers crackled to life. A familiar voice, his voice, filled the chamber. The grainy 1997 Howard Stern audio rolled out like a ghost from another era. Stern's laughter, the baiting question, and Trump's smug reply, "I think I could." A ripple of shock moved through the room, sharp and physical. Somewhere in the back, a reporter's pen froze mid-scratch. MAGA senators erupted instantly, barking objections, their voices clashing with the hiss of the recording. "Point of order," one shouted, but Jasmine didn't even glance at them. She let the audio run, let it hang in the air like the smell of smoke after an explosion. When it stopped, she leaned forward, her voice low but edged with steel. "This is not about gossip," she said, each word measured, deliberate. "This is about character, about the judgment of a man who once sat in the highest office in this country, boasting about sleeping with a dead princess as if it were a trophy." Trump shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. He tried to smirk again, but it faltered into something harder, meaner. "You're nothing but a social media clown," he snapped, his voice carrying just enough to be picked up by every mic in the room. A few MAGA allies laughed too loudly, a brittle sound in the heavy air. Jasmine didn't blink. "Dead or a clown," she fired back instantly, then a predator in the Oval Office, The words landed like a slap, and this time it was the Democrats' turn to smirk, to murmur approval. The camera caught the flicker in Trump's eyes, the one he got when someone dared to hit back without fear. The chair banged the gavel for order, but the electricity in the room refused to settle. Outside these walls, hashtags were already mutating, screenshots of Trump's expression shooting across Twitter like tracer rounds. And in the far corner of the public gallery, a movement caught Jasmine's eye. A man leaning forward, hands folded, face half hidden behind the brim of a notepad. Michael Wolff, the author who had carved open more political scandals than most journalists dared to touch. He wasn't supposed to be here, not yet, not before the closed session. Jasmine's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. If Wolff was in the gallery this early, he had a reason. And if that reason connected to what she was about to drop next, the day's storm had only just begun. She looked back at Trump, who was watching her now with open hostility, the kind that spoke of fear he couldn't disguise. She didn't smile. Instead, she let the silence stretch just long enough for the audience, in the room and at home, to feel it pressing down on them. Somewhere deep inside, they knew this wasn't the worst thing they were going to hear today. And Jasmine was about to prove them right. Jasmine didn't give the room a chance to exhale. She leaned toward the mic, her voice slower now but cutting cleaner than any shout could. This is a pattern, not an accident. Donald Trump has built his life treating women as trophies, possessions to be displayed, conquered, discarded. We've all heard the words, we've all seen the behavior. And if you think Princess Diana was the first or the last, you're not paying attention. She let the words hang, then pulled a sheet from her folder, glancing down only long enough to choose her next target. He bragged on TV about walking in on beauty pageant contestants while they were dressing. He told a reporter his own daughter had a great body and joked about dating her. He called women pieces of ass in interviews he thought no one would remember. And then there was Epstein, the convicted predator he called a terrific guy before pretending he barely knew him. A murmur rippled through the chamber, but Jasmine pressed on. The C-SPAN feed cut briefly to B-roll, not by accident, a stark, silent montage of Trump's public moments, the awkward kiss on a pageant stage, the ex-Hollywood boss, his smirk beside Epstein at Mar-a-Lago, the photograph with Princess Diana smiling politely but standing just far enough away. Each image was a nail in a coffin the nation hadn't realized it was building. Back in the chamber, Trump's face was a mask, but the muscles in his jaw worked like he was grinding the enamel off his teeth. In the gallery, Michael Wolff stood. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor was soft, but in the taut air of the hearing it might as well have been a gunshot. He straightened his suit jacket, notepad in hand, and the room seemed to contract around him. Jasmine's eyes found his, and he gave the faintest nod, a signal or maybe a warning. Senators shifted uneasily. The chair cleared his throat but didn't stop him. The hearing had just changed shape. Wolff didn't speak yet. He simply stood there, a presence loaded with unspent ammunition. The press gallery leaned forward, pens poised, cameras ready. Jasmine's voice dropped again, almost to a whisper, forcing every ear in the room to strain for it. This is the man we trusted with the nuclear codes, the power to wage war, the power to appoint judges who will decide the rights of every woman in this country for generations. A man who measures women's worth by their ability to decorate his arm. Who sees status, not humanity, who looks at a princess and thinks, prize. The room was silent now, not out of respect, but because the tension had cinched tight enough to strangle. Jasmine straightened, her gaze sweeping the chamber, and then locked once more on Trump. So the question before us isn't whether he said it, or whether he meant it. The question is this. She leaned in, her voice ablaze. What happens when the most powerful man in the world believes every woman is prey, and the hunt never ends? Jasmine turned toward the gallery, her voice steady but edged with something heavier now, anticipation. Mr. Michael Wolff, please join us. Head swiveled as Wolff stepped forward, each step deliberate, the click of his shoes a metronome marking the moment. Everyone in the chamber knew his reputation, the man who had cracked open the private rot of political royalty, who had made presidents squirm under the weight of their own words. He carried only a worn leather notepad. The edges frayed like the stories inside had been trying to claw their way out. When he reached the witness table, he didn't sit right away. He looked at Trump first, not long, just enough to let the cameras catch it. Then he sat, adjusted the mic, and folded his hands. "Mr. Wolf," Jasmine began, "you've written extensively about Donald Trump's personal and political life. Today, I'd like you to focus on one particular claim, a claim that, until now, has never been heard in this chamber." Wolf's mouth curved slightly, the kind of smile that belongs to a man holding something combustible. "Yes," he said evenly, "Trump and Epstein. They had a game, a competition. Who could get to her first? Princess Diana. It wasn't about romance. It was about prestige, status, a trophy neither of them deserved to touch." The room shifted, a ripple of murmurs, the scratch of hurried pen on paper, the staccato of keyboards in the press gallery. Jasmine let him continue, leaning back just enough to give him space, but never breaking eye contact. "They talked about it openly in certain circles," Wolf went on. "Not crude, exactly. Worse, calculated. They weren't after her as a person. She was a symbol to them, the ultimate proof of access to the highest tiers of society. Epstein used the challenge to needle Trump. Trump treated it like a deal to be closed." From the far side of the dais, a Republican senator shook his head, muttering under his breath. Another leaned toward a staffer, whispering fast enough to blur the words. Cameras swung to catch every flicker of discomfort. "Lies." Trump's voice detonated across the room. He slammed a palm onto the table, the sound sharp enough to make two aides flinch. "This is garbage, made-up tabloid trash. This man's a fraud." His voice rose, cracking at the edges. MAGA senators jumped in with their own protests, but it was Trump's face, flushed, tight, eyes darting, that told the story the microphones couldn't edit out. Jasmine didn't shout over him, she waited. The gavel banged twice, but it was her silence that cut through the noise. Slowly, she lifted one hand, palm out toward Trump, not to placate, but to command. The chamber went still again, pulled into her gravity. She didn't even look at him when she spoke. "We're not done yet," she said, her tone a blade sliding from its sheath. "And when we are, you'll wish we had been." Wolf didn't need to glance at his notes. Trump, Penn, Epstein moved through the same social corridors. He began, voice calm but waited, like a duo of predators who knew exactly when and where the other would strike. They weren't competitors in the usual sense. They were co-conspirators in a culture that treated women, especially young, glamorous women, as currency. He paused just long enough to let the image sink in. "And they spent it freely," the gallery murmured. Cameras zoomed on Trump, whose jaw worked furiously but whose mouth stayed shut for now. "They entertained together," Wolf continued, "hosting in Palm Beach, Manhattan, and occasionally in places far more private. Late-night parties in Epstein's Palm Beach estate, where the guest list was curated like a portfolio. Models, socialites, the occasional royal. Prince Andrew was no stranger there, neither was Trump." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping as though he were letting the room in on a secret. "They had codes, short phrases no outsider could parse. The yachts full meant the women had arrived. It's gallery night meant they were shopping for new faces. Everyone inside their circle understood, no one outside it was supposed to." The chamber was utterly still except for the rapid-fire clicking from the press gallery. Even the senators who'd been shifting uncomfortably earlier were frozen now, caught between disbelief and recognition. Wolf's words weren't just accusations, they were maps to a hidden world. "What's worse," he said, "was how power insulated them. They knew police chiefs by first name, they knew which reporters wouldn't print. They knew which political favors to trade for silence. It was a machine, a network built not just to indulge them, but to protect them." Trump shifted abruptly, leaning toward his lawyer, whispering fast. The lawyer scribbled something on a legal pad, but Trump's glare was fixed on Wolf as if sheer will might erase the testimony. Jasmine, seated with her hands folded, was a study in composure, but her eyes tracked every tick in Trump's expression. Wolf let the pause stretch, then added, "And when Diana's name came up in those circles, the tone changed. She wasn't just another conquest, she was the ultimate prize. To land her meant you'd transcended even celebrity, it meant you were untouchable." That word, untouchable, seemed to pull the oxygen out of the air. A Republican senator finally broke the silence, his voice pitched to cut through the tension. "This is salacious and unsubstantiated," he barked. "Do you have any real evidence to back up this circus?" The challenge hung in the air like a dare. Jasmine's head turned slowly toward him, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles, not the smile of someone amused, but of someone holding a loaded weapon behind her back. She didn't answer right away. She let the senator stew in the pause, then said softly, "Oh, Senator. You're about to find out just how real this gets." Jasmine reached beneath the desk, fingers brushing the edge of a slim, black portfolio. When she placed it on the table, the leather made a dull thud that somehow silenced even the senator's still muttering in protest. She didn't rush. Her hands moved with deliberate precision as she flipped it open, revealing glossy photographs under a thin sheet of plastic. The nearest camera operator zoomed in instantly, the image feeding to every television and live stream in America. "These," Jasmine began, "are from an exclusive Palm Beach gathering in 1996, a guest list so tight it could fit on a single page. The kind of event you don't walk into, you're invited." She slid the top photo free and held it at an angle so the glare caught just enough to give it weight. The picture showed a grand ballroom drenched in gold light, a chandelier spilling diamonds of glass over a crowd of the rich and infamous. And there, in the corner, Princess Diana, posed in a pale silk dress, her smile courteous but guarded. Jasmine let the image linger before pulling the second photo. "This," she said, "is the guest list, every name, handwritten. Epstein's right here." Her finger tapped the page. "Trump's here." Tap, then, slowly, she circled another in red ink, already marked when the portfolio came out. "And here," she said, "is Diana." The name glowed under the circle, 3 letters taller than the rest. A ripple of tension cracked through the chamber. Some senators shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, squinting at the projection, as if they might discover a different truth if they looked hard enough. In the gallery, journalists exchanged quick glances, already guessing the headlines. On screen, the split view captured Trump's reaction, his hand tightening around the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. The faint tremor in his index finger as it tapped once against the wood. "Why was she there?" Jasmine asked aloud, though she didn't expect an answer yet. Why was a newly divorced Princess of Wales at an Epstein-hosted gathering in Palm Beach? And why, out of all the nights, out of all the people, was Donald Trump in the same room? She turned the page again, revealing a candid shot. Trump and Epstein standing near the champagne table, Epstein leaning in to say something, Trump's eyes fixed on a point just beyond the frame. The angle was off, the focus imperfect, but the unease in the image was unmistakable. Trump shifted in his seat, exhaling sharply through his nose. His lawyer passed him a note, but he didn't look at it. Cameras closed in on his hands, now both gripping the table as though anchoring himself. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady, quiet enough that the room had to hold its breath to hear it. "If you had nothing to hide, Mr. Trump," she said, letting each word drop like a stone into still water, "why were you there the very same night Jeffrey Epstein was? And why was Diana?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, like a fuse waiting for the spark. Trump had been gripping the table in silence for too long, and when he finally spoke, the words came out like bullets ricocheting off marble. "You," he sneered, jabbing a finger in Jasmine's direction, "are nothing but a low-rent stunt performer from a second-rate state. Nobody knew your name until you started chasing mine. You dress like a discount TV host, you talk like a street protester, and you represent a place nobody cares about unless they're trying to avoid paying taxes." His voice grew louder, faster, the practiced rhythm of a man who had built his career on tearing others down before they could draw blood. "You're here for the cameras, Jasmine, not the country. You don't belong in this room. You belong on a bad reality show." The MAGA loyalists in the chamber erupted into laughter and applause, their voices ricocheting off the walls. Some pounded the tables like a rally crowd, their shouts bleeding into the microphones. In the press gallery, reporters scribbled frantically, knowing the sound bites would dominate the evening news. Across the aisle, Democrats rolled their eyes, some shaking their heads, others leaning back in their chairs with the kind of disbelief that borders on contempt. Jasmine didn't so much as blink. She let him burn himself out, her posture unchanged, hands still neatly folded in front of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, each syllable cutting clean. "I've been called worse," she said, leaning into the mic so her words carried to the farthest corner, "by better men. And you, "Donald, you don't scare me." The chamber's air tightened. The cheer from Trump's side faltered just enough for her to keep going. Because when the truth walks into the room, the only thing predators can do is snarl. "And you've been snarling since the moment I said Diana's name." Trump opened his mouth to fire back, but Jasmine's eyes locked on his, holding him in place. "You can mock my state, my voice, my face. It doesn't matter. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here to ask the questions you've spent decades running from. And the more you talk, the more every person watching can see exactly why those questions scare you." The Democrats behind her began to nod, murmurs of approval rolling through their row like the first rumble before a storm. The gavel banged for order, but the sound was swallowed by the noise. MAGA voices roared back in defiance, Democrats countered with shouts of their own, and the gallery had turned into a hive of urgent whispers and frantic camera shutters. The chair's voice was lost entirely as Trump leaned toward his allies. Jasmine sat back in her seat, and the crowd's clamor swelled until it was no longer political theater. It was a street brawl in a marble chamber. The gavel kept pounding, but in that moment it was as powerless as a drumstick against a hurricane. The roar in the chamber hadn't even begun to fade when the first procedural grenade was thrown. Senator Halford of Texas, one of Trump's most loyal attack dogs, shot to his feet, barking, "Point of order. The gentlewoman from Texas is engaging in character assassination unrelated to the committee's agenda." His voice cracked just enough to betray the urgency beneath the bluster. Jasmine didn't even glance at him. "The agenda," she replied, her tone crisp as glass, "is oversight of conduct unbecoming a public servant. I'd say sexualized boasts about a deceased princess qualify." Another Republican senator, Green of Florida, piled on. "Mr. Chairman, I move to suspend the gentlewoman's questioning until a review of her statements can be conducted." A few MAGA senators murmured assent like they'd rehearsed it. The chair hesitated, clearly calculating the optics of cutting off the only woman of color currently at the mic. Jasmine saw the opening and pounced. "Mr. Chairman," she said sharply, "under Rule 19, I have the floor until my allotted time expires. Unless you plan to rewrite the rules mid-hearing for Mr. Trump's comfort, I'll continue." The words landed hard enough to make even a few Republican staffers look away. Green muttered something under his breath. Jasmine heard it, and so did her mic. "Call me a grandstanding Democrat again," she shot back, "and I'll remind you your own state's ethics board has an open file on you." Laughter broke from the Democratic side. Cameras caught the flicker of irritation on Green's face. The procedural attacks kept coming, but Jasmine parried each with surgical precision, flipping through her annotated copy of the Senate rules like a duelist pulling fresh blades. "Point of personal privilege," one MAGA senator shouted. "Deny," Jasmine said before the chair could speak, then smiled sweetly. "You're free to be offended. You're not free to silence me." Her one-liners started ricocheting out of the chamber in real time, picked up by journalists and amplified on social media. Deader a clown than a predator became a trending quote card within minutes. Rule 19, is my armor turned into a meme with her face overlaid on a knight's helmet. Every time she landed another lie, the Republicans' frustration became more visible. Shuffled papers, tightened jaws, whispered strategy. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching his allies take the hits in his place. But Jasmine made sure to keep dragging the spotlight back to him. "Every procedural stunt you pull," she said to the room, "is another way of telling America you're terrified of what I'm about to say." She let her gaze slide to Trump, holding it there for a beat too long, the tension tightening like a wire between them. In the press gallery, phones lit up with push alerts. A CNN producer mouthed the words as she read them from her screen. #Predator-in-Chief is trending. The phrase wasn't just a hashtag now. It was a verdict, one that was writing itself in real time as the hearing barreled forward. Unstoppable. The gallery had been a restless hum since the hearing began, but now it was alive, voices rising, chairs shifting, the kind of low, rolling murmur that felt like a crowd on the edge of eruption. Jasmine's last strike had landed hard, and the people watching above the chamber floor were no longer hiding their reactions. A woman in the second row clapped once, sharply, and was met with a wave of scattered applause before security could gesture her down. Others leaned over the railing, whispering too loudly, eyes fixed on Jasmine as if she were a prizefighter who had just drawn blood. On the TV feeds, the split screen widened to show the gallery. CNN's Chiron Rhee, Live. Crockett vs. Trump. Senate hearing erupts. Over on MSNBC, a commentator's voice was almost giddy. "This isn't a hearing anymore," he said. "This is a political brawl on live television." Fox cut to a panel of tight-faced analysts, one muttering, "This is a circus," even as their cameras refused to look away. Jasmine kept her voice level, but the rhythm of her delivery was quickening, pulling the gallery with her. "We've heard about the parties," she said. "We've seen the guest lists. We've listened to Mr. Wolf describe the game between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, a game with Princess Diana's name in play. Now, I have to ask, is this the kind of man we want deciding the laws for our daughters, our wives, our sisters?" That drew an audible gasp from someone near the back, followed by a low rumble of assent. Trump leaned into his mic, the contempt rolling off him. "You're grandstanding, Jasmine. You're good at it, I'll give you that. But you're making this all about you." His words carried, but they couldn't drown out the sound of a man in the gallery muttering, "No, she's making it about you," loud enough for the mix to pick up. The line hit Twitter before the next sentence left Jasmine's mouth. She stepped closer to the witness table, closing the physical space between them, forcing Trump to either meet her eyes or look away. "No, Mr. Trump," she said evenly, "I'm making it about the truth. The truth you've dodged for decades, the truth you've buried under lawyers, payoffs, and distractions. The truth that every time you open your mouth, you hand back to me on a silver platter." The gallery nose swelled again, a wave of clapping, shouts of yes, and say it. The chair's gavel banged once, twice, but the sound was swallowed whole. On-screen captions across the networks flashed, "Gallery reacts loudly as Crockett presses Trump." Jasmine didn't look at the gavel, or the chair, or even the crowd. She kept her eyes locked on Trump, her tone sharpening to a single, piercing point. "If you can't handle my questions, Mr. Trump," she said, letting the pause sharpen the blade, "how could you ever handle the truth, the whole, ugly, unedited truth, when it finally stands in front of you and refuses to move?" Jasmine let the nose from the gallery simmer for just a beat longer before she reached into her blazer. When her hand came back into view, it was holding something small and black, a USB drive no bigger than a thumb. The object looked almost harmless under the chamber lights, but the way she held it, pinched delicately between her fingers as if it were both precious and dangerous, made every eye in the room lock onto it. "What I have here," she said slowly, "is a recording that has never been aired, never been leaked, and never been heard by anyone outside a very small circle. It's an interview between Michael Wolff and Jeffrey Epstein." The reaction was immediate. Gasps snapped through the chamber, senators leaning toward each other in sharp whispers, aides fumbling for their phones. In the gallery, a woman's hand flew to her mouth. Reporters shot forward in their seats, the rapid click of camera shutters sounding like rainfall on a tin roof. Jasmine placed the USB gently on the desk in front of her, then tapped it once with her finger, a sound that the mic caught like a gavel strike. "This," she continued, "is Epstein, in his own voice, talking about his relationships, his network, and Donald Trump." The chair's head jerked up, eyes flicking to the parliamentarian. "Order," he called, but it was lost under the rising tide of no's. Two Republican senators immediately barked objections. "This is inadmissible. We don't know its authenticity," while Democrats shouted back that the public had a right to hear it. The chamber was devolving into a verbal melee, the gavel pounding like a heartbeat gone too fast. Wolff sat forward, hands clasped, watching the chaos unfold with the faint smile of a man who had seen this scene in his head for years. "She's not bluffing," he said into his mic, not loud but just enough for the press feed to catch it. The statement fanned the flames. MSNBC ran the chyron instantly. "Wolff, she's not bluffing." Jasmine waited until the din hit its peak, then stowed. "You want authenticity? Play it. You want to know if it's real? Play it. Let the American people hear Epstein's voice and decide for themselves. Let them hear how easily men like him moved through the same rooms, the same circles, the same nights as Donald Trump." From the far end of the table, Trump, who had been uncharacteristically still, suddenly lurched forward. His voice tore across the chamber, louder than the gavel, louder than the protests. "You can't play that." The rawness in his tone wasn't outrage. It was fear. It sliced through the room, freezing the nose for just a second, long enough for everyone in the chamber in the gallery, and watching at home, to realize they had just witnessed something break. The chamber's nose thinned to a brittle silence as Jasmine slid the USB into the console port. A blue light blinked once, then the speakers came alive with a soft hiss, the kind of sound that makes the back of your neck tighten, and then a voice. Smooth, low, unmistakable, Jeffrey Epstein. We used to joke about it. The recording began, his tone casual, like he was recalling a private joke over cigars. Did Diana bet who'd get there first? Donald always thought he had the edge. The words hung in the air like smoke from a slow burn. A gasp cracked the stillness. A reporter, in the gallery, hand frozen over her notepad. Another journalist's pen skittered across paper in a furious scrawl. In the press box, someone muttered, "Oh my God," into a hot mic. The air inside the Senate chamber seemed to draw in on itself, heavy, close, as if the walls were listening to. Trump jolted forward, his voice booming over the speakers. "This is garbage. Fake." But the recording kept playing, Epstein's words gliding over the protests. It wasn't about romance. It was about the game, status, influence. To be seen with her was to be untouchable. The word echoed through the room, the same word Wolf had used earlier, and you could almost feel the connection snapping into place for everyone listening. Jasmine didn't even glance at Trump. Her eyes were on the committee, her expression carved from stone. The MAGA senators were fidgeting now, some rifling through papers, others whispering to aides with tight, clipped urgency. The Democrats sat forward, leaning into the moment like a wave pushing toward shore. Trump's interruptions became sharper, more frantic. "That's enough, turn it off. You're all hearing lies from a dead man." But the voice on the tape was very much alive in that moment. Donald talked about it more than anyone, Epstein went on. He liked the idea that everyone would know. That it would be proof he could get anything, or anyone, he wanted. The chair's gavel struck wood again, but the rhythm was drowned under the twin sounds of Epstein's calm recollection and Trump's ragged interjections. The split-screen feed told the story. Trump leaning forward, red-faced, barking over the recording, while Jasmine remained perfectly still, letting the contrast do its own damage. Epstein's voice softened slightly, like he was leaning closer to the mic. "And between you and me, it was never really about her. It was about beating me." That line hit the room like a silent explosion. No shouting now, just the collective awareness that they were hearing something no one was supposed to hear. The audio clicked to a pause. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Jasmine leaned into her mic, her voice low but carrying. "There's more," she said, letting the words drip slow, deliberate, much more. And in that moment, it wasn't just Trump who shifted in his chair. It was the entire chamber, bracing for the next detonation. Jasmine let the words much more hang in the air until the quiet in the chamber was almost unbearable. Then she leaned forward, resting her hands on the table, her voice steady but edged with steel. "What you just heard isn't an isolated moment. It's part of a pattern, a way of thinking, a way of wielding power, that Donald Trump has lived by for decades. Women as trophies, people as transactions, every relationship measured by what it can give him, never what he can give back." She turned toward the senators, scanning the room slowly, forcing each one to meet her eyes. "You've seen it in how he talks about women. You've seen it in how he talks about this country. It's the same playbook." The Democrats nodded almost imperceptibly. The Republicans avoided her gaze. The gallery was locked in, their attention razor sharp. "This is not just about Donald Trump's obsession with Princess Diana," she continued. "It's about a man who treats every human being, from a young model in a hotel lobby to a head of state across a negotiation table, as a prize to be acquired, a tool to be used, a prop to burnish his own image." She paused, letting the indictment sink in. Trump tried to interrupt, but the gavel snapped down before he could get more than a word out. Jasmine kept going, her cadence tightening, pulling the listeners with her. "Look at the record. Cabinet appointments traded for loyalty oaths. Judges selected for their willingness to protect him over the Constitution. Foreign aid dangled like bait for personal favors. This isn't leadership, it's exploitation. It's the same mindset you just heard on that tape, but applied to the highest office in the land." In the press gallery, reporters typed furiously, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards almost in sync with her rising tempo. TV commentators whispered into their mix, already framing the moment for the millions watching at home. Ask yourself, Jasmine said, her voice lowering but losing none of its force, what happens when someone who sees women as prizes starts seeing entire nations the same way? When he starts treating alliances, laws, and the lives of citizens as just more chips in his game? Trump shifted in his seat, lips pressed tight, his eyes darting between Jasmine and the cameras. He looked less like a man in control and more like a man calculating escape routes. Jasmine didn't give him one. She leaned just slightly closer to her mic, the subtle move pulling every ear in the room toward her. Because if that's how he views power, as something to be hoarded, traded, and flaunted, then it's not just the women in his path who are at risk. It's every single one of us, every freedom we take for granted, every safeguard we think is uncheckable. Her final words cut through the charged silence like a blade. So tell me, how safe is our democracy when its leader thinks people, and entire nations, are just prizes to be won? Outside the marble walls of the Senate, the country was already bowling over. In front of the Capitol, hundreds of people pressed against barricades, their voices rising in dueling chants that collided like clashing cymbals. On one side, protesters held cardboard signs scrawled with "No one above the law and believe women." On the other, MAGA flags snapped in the late afternoon wine, their bearers shouting into bullhorns, "Witch Hunt" and "Trump 2024. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust, sweat, and something sharper, the raw heat of a country split clean down the middle. Cable news trucks lined the curbs, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Anchors stood with mics pressed tight, the crowd nose bleeding into every live shot. "What we're seeing here," one MSNBC correspondent said breathlessly, "is the kind of spontaneous public eruption that only happens when the political ground really shifts." A Fox News anchor across the street had a different read, calling it a stage-managed spectacle meant to smear the former president, but their split screens showed the same thing. Americans on both sides of the barricade, screaming to be heard. Down in Richmond, a group of women gather in a diner around a mounted TV, the closed captions scrolling under Jasmine's frozen face mid-confrontation. "She's saying what no one else has the guts to say," one middle-aged woman in a denim jacket told a local reporter. "I don't care what party you're in. If a man talks about women like that, he shouldn't be running the country." At the other end of the counter, another woman shook her head, her voice hard. "This is political theater. They hate Trump because he scares them. She's just trying to make a name for herself." In Des Moines, a college campus quad erupted into debate as students huddled around phones streaming the hearing live. A young Latina student's voice cracked with intensity. "It's not just about Diana. It's about every woman who's been treated like a trophy. We've all been in her place." A tall blonde student in a red cap shot back, "You don't get to ruin a man's life over a joke from 30 years ago." Their classmates filmed the exchange, uploading it within minutes, one clip already pushing past 100,000 views before the hearing had even adjourned. On TikTok, edits of Jasmine's sharpest lines began to circulate, each cut sharper than the last. "Deader a clown than a predator" danced over split-screen footage of Trump's tightened jaw. On Twitter, the hashtag Predator-in-Chief was joined by another, #DianaBet. Memes sprouted like wildfire, pairing Jasmine's face with captions like, "She came for the king, and he blinked first." By sundown, the confrontation had leapt beyond political corners into mainstream pop culture accounts, late-night comedy feeds, even celebrity Instagram stories. A drone shot of the crowd outside the Capitol, cut together with Jasmine's line, "How safe is our democracy when its leader thinks people are just prizes to be won?" hit 5 million views before the hour was up. And then came the real gut punch. YouTube's live counter on the official hearing feed ticked past 20 million views, less than 6 hours after she'd uttered her first question. The number kept climbing, each digit another sign that the battle inside the Senate had ignited something far bigger and far harder to contain. By nightfall, the Senate chamber had emptied, but the battle had only just shifted arenas. In glass-walled studios from New York to Los Angeles, producers barked orders into headsets, editors sliced sound bites with surgical precision, and the nation's narrative was rewritten in real time. On Fox News, the headline screamed across the lower third in block red letters, "Democrat smear campaign hits new low." Sean Hannity's voice thunder over a loop clip of Jasmine leaning into her mic. "This is a coordinated hit job," he declared, jabbing a finger toward the camera. A radical leftist using taxpayer time to settle personal vendettas. They can't beat Trump at the ballot box, so they try to humiliate him in hearings with scripted drama and baseless accusations. The studio audience nodded, murmuring their approval as guests chimed in about media manipulation and weaponized gossip. On CNN, the mood was entirely different. The chyron read, "The Reckoning, Crockett vs. Trump." Anderson Cooper replayed the moment Jasmine held up the circled guest list, the photo of Diana's posed smile under the chandelier. "This isn't a stunt," Cooper said, his voice measured. "It's accountability. We've spent years hearing whispers about Trump's association with Jeffrey Epstein. Today, the whispers turned into testimony and evidence in the United States Senate." His panelists spoke of historical parallels, drawing lines to past political collapses triggered not by policy, but by character revelations the public could not unsee. MSNBC took a more visceral approach. Rachel Maddow's team rolled a split-screen reel that became the night's viral visual. On the left, Trump pinned 1997 on the Howard Stern show, laughing as he said, "I think I could." On the right, today's footage of Trump gripping the table, his jaw tight, eyes flicking toward Jasmine. The audio from both played back-to-back, the past bleeding into the present with no room to wriggle free. Maddow's voice cut in over the montage. 2 decades apart, the same man, the same instincts. The question is whether America is willing to see it now. Meanwhile, social media amplified every angle at warp speed. Fox clips trended in MAGA circles as proof of deep state attacks. CNN's framing sparked threads about systemic misogyny and abuse of power. MSNBC's split screen became a meme format overnight, users replacing the right-hand footage with everything from collapsing bridges to melting ice sculptures, always tagged #PredatorInChief. In newsroom green rooms, guests watch the feeds not for information, but for impact, measuring which version of the story was taking hold fastest. The divide was so sharp it felt less like one country reacting to the same event and more like two separate nations processing entirely different realities. Yet, in every version, one truth was unavoidable. Donald Trump had been forced into a moment he couldn't fully control, and the cracks were visible. As midnight newscasts teased their closing segments, a question lingered across the tickers and in the minds of millions watching at home. Is this the moment Donald Trump's image doesn't just take a hit, but finally shatters? By dawn, the battle had moved from newsrooms to bank accounts. Jasmine's campaign website, which had been running on a steady hum of grassroots donations, suddenly lit up like a slot machine. The analytics team watched the counter spin past numbers they'd never seen, each spike timed almost perfectly with a viral clip of her dismantling Trump in the Senate. A $25 donation from a retired schoolteacher in Ohio came with a note. "Thank you for saying what we've all been screaming at RTVS for years." A $100 transfer from a women's advocacy group in California read simply, "Keep going. Don't back down." By mid-morning, her treasurer was on the phone with the platform provider, making sure the servers could handle the flood. The numbers told their own story. $250,000 in the first 3 hours, $500,000 by lunch. Each confirmation email ping was another vote of confidence, another signal that the hearing had cracked something open. Jasmine's communications director drafted a statement framing the surge as a movement, not a moment, but Jasmine herself stayed silent, knowing the optics of speaking too soon could make it look like she'd staged the whole thing for cash. On the other side of the political battlefield, Trump's PAC turned the confrontation into a call to arms. By 9 a.m., inboxes across MAGA world lit up with subject lines screaming, "The radical predator hunter is coming for US next." The email body was pure adrenaline. Jasmine Crockett and her socialist allies just launched the most vicious smear in history. "They won't stop until they destroy your president and your America. We need you to fight back right now. Chip in $20.20 to send a message it can't ignore." The strategy was clear. Paint Jasmine as a weapon of the deep state, a threat so dangerous that even loyalists who had been cooling on Trump would feel the pull to defend him. Within hours, small dollar donations began stacking up. Aides whispered that the PAC had brought in nearly $1 million before the day was out, proof that outrage was still one of Trump's most valuable currencies. Cable networks ran split screens showing the dueling money meters climbing in real time, like two thermometers in a political fever. Pundits called it the monetization of scandal and America's new national sport. outrage investing, but beneath the flashy graphics, the truth was starker. This wasn't just a contest for who could yell the loudest. It was a race to turn public anger into war chests big enough to shape the next election. That evening, Jasmine finally addressed the surge. Standing in front of a crowd at a hastily arranged rally, she didn't thank donors by name or talk about dollar amounts. Instead, she leaned into the mic, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of steel. If this fight was only about Donald Trump, she said, it would be over when he is, but it's not. This is about the system that built him, protected him, and still shields men like him in every corner of power. This is bigger than one man. This is about ripping the rot out by its roots before it swallows our democracy whole. The chair was mid-sentence when Trump suddenly leaned forward, cutting him off with a raised hand and that familiar tone that demanded, not requested, the floor. "I'm going to make a final statement," he said, his voice booming across the chamber. "And I don't care if she likes it or not." Jasmine didn't even look at the chair. "No, Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice level but sharp enough to cut glass, "this time belongs to me, and I'm not yielding it so Donald Trump can play the victim on national television." Trump's lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Victim? You've spent hours spewing lies, twisting facts, dragging a great American name through the mud. You're not just attacking me, you're destroying America's dignity." The MAGA senators nodded like metronomes, murmurs of agreement slipping into the air. Jasmine leaned in, elbows on the desk, her voice dropping to that dangerous, measured cadence that made people lean closer to hear. "No, Donald," she said, each word landing with precision, "you did that yourself." The Democrats behind her stifled a ripple of applause. The gallery went quiet, waiting to see if he'd take the bait. He did. Trump shot up from his seat so fast his chair skidded back an inch. "You think you're some kind of hero," he barked. "You're a fraud. You've built your career attacking people better than you'll ever be." His voice rose, ragged at the edges, as cameras zoomed tight on the flush creeping up his neck. Jasmine didn't move at first, then, slowly, she stood too, matching his height, matching his stance. "Deader than me," she said, her tone icy. "A man who jokes about sleeping with a princess who isn't alive to defend herself. A man who calls women pieces and prizes. You're not better than me, Donald. You're not better than any woman in this country. And the only reason you're still standing here is because too many people were too scared to tell you that to your face." They were both on their feet now, the space between them a tight, invisible wire. Neither blinked, neither sat. The gavel pounded, the chair calling for order, but the sound barely registered over the electric silence that had fallen, the kind where you knew, instinctively, that something irreversible had just shifted. Jasmine didn't break eye contact with Trump until the chair's gavel came down again, this time with enough force to leave a dent. Then she turned, not to the senators, not to the gallery, but straight to the cameras. Her voice lowered, but the edge in it was sharper than ever, the kind of tone that made living rooms across the country go still. "To everyone watching this, I'm not talking to the politicians in this room right now. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to the people who've been told to look the other way. I'm talking to the women who've been laughed at when they told the truth. I'm talking to the men who know in their gut that dignity is not something you auction off for power." She took a step closer to the mic, her hands gripping the desk, her gaze unflinching. "What you just saw in this chamber is not a one-time thing. It is a reflection of what happens when we allow arrogance, entitlement, and predatory behavior to masquerade as leadership. It's what happens when we decide that power matters more than principle, and when we forget that character counts even more than charisma." Her words moved with the cadence of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, each phrase landing like a blow. "This isn't about left or right. This isn't about party loyalty. This is about the person we hand the keys to, the one we trust to speak for us, to act for us, to protect us. And if that person believes people are trophies, if they see women as prizes to be won, if they measure worth in headlines and handshakes instead of humanity, then the danger isn't hypothetical, it's already here." In the gallery, the air felt thick, almost weighted. At home, thousands sat forward on couches, phones buzzing with live alerts as her words clipped into sound bites primed to ricochet across every platform. She let the pause stretch just long enough to let the weight settle. Then, with her voice tightening into something even more deliberate, She asked the question she knew would outlive the hearing itself. So, America, when the cameras are off and the microphones are gone, when it's just you and the ballot in your hand, who do you want speaking for your daughters and your granddaughters? Trump's chair screeched back across the floor, the sound sharp enough to slice through the thick silence in the chamber. He didn't ask for the floor this time. He didn't even look at the chair or the cameras. He simply stood, jaw locked, eyes narrowed, and started for the exit with long, deliberate strides. Aides scrambled to gather his papers, one of them nearly tripping over a power cable in the rush. The press gallery erupted into a flurry of movement, cameras whipping to track him as reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. In the gallery, a man called out, running away, "Donald," drawing a murmur of laughter from one side and a wave of boos from the other. The split-screen feeds across the networks caught every angle, the back of his suit jacket flaring as he pushed through the double doors, the MAGA senators rising halfway from their seats as if they might follow, and, most damningly, the still figure of Jasmine Crockett, standing alone at her desk. She didn't move to chase him, she didn't smile in victory or paunt his retreat. Instead, she straightened to her full height, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, her eyes tracking the empty doorway as the echo of his footsteps faded. The chair's gavel fell once, twice, a futile attempt to restore formality, but the room's focus was locked on the stark contrast between the man who had left and the woman who remained. TV commentators' voices overlapped as the moment replayed on loop. "It's rare to see a former president walk out of a Senate hearing mid-session," one analyst said on CNN, and rarer still for it to happen after being pinned down by a single line of questioning. MSNBC framed it more bluntly. Trump left. Jasmine stood. Even Fox, in its scramble to spin, couldn't avoid showing the footage, though they ran it with a caption about grandstanding theatrics. Jasmine let the murmurs die down before leaning into her mic, her voice steady, even, deliberate. "For those watching at home, you just saw what happens when truth is stronger than bluster. But understand this, one man walking out does not mean the problem has walked out with him." She paused, letting the words settle in every corner of the chamber, in every living room glued to the broadcast. "This fight," she said, her gaze sweeping the room like a warning flare, "isn't over." By sunrise, the walkout was everywhere. The footage lay every broadcast from Washington to London, Sydney to Tokyo. The exit heard around the world, blared The Guardian. "Crockett holds ground as Trump retreats," declared the New York Times. Even tabloids in Europe splashed his mid-stride image under headlines about shame man flight on cable news. The moment replayed so many times it became a drumbeat in the public's mind, each loop reminding viewers who stayed and who fled. Overnight polls told the same story. Independent voters shifted noticeably toward Jasmine, her favorability climbing into territory that even seasoned strategists called uncharted. In a flash poll by Reuters, 61% of respondents said Trump looked afraid when he left the chamber. Social media caught fire with split-screen memes, Trump's back disappearing through the doors on the left, Jasmine's steady gaze fixed on the right. The hashtag he ran she stood hit the top of Twitter within hours, surpassing even the day's biggest sports stories. But it wasn't just politics. Survivors of abuse, some public figures, some anonymous, began posting messages of gratitude. "You stood for us," read one viral tweet, signed only with the initial L. A coalition of women's rights groups issued a joint statement praising Jasmine's unflinching resolve in the face of bullying and intimidation. On the courthouse steps in Philadelphia, a woman in her 60s held up a sign that read, "Predators hate the light. Keep shining it." The praise came with pushback. MAGA loyalists flooded conservative radio with calls branding Jasmine a witch hunter and warning of deep state setups. Trump surrogates demanded the hearings be adjourned until the full scope of BIAS is investigated. The tension hung heavy over Washington, not unlike the air before a summer storm. And yet, beneath the roar of headlines and chants, another current was building. Quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous. Late in the day, Reuters broke a lie buried in a legal filing, references to sealed federal records tied to Trump's private engagements during the Epstein years. No details, no leaks, just a legal shadow stretching long across the Capitol. Jasmine saw the update on her phone in the back of a car headed to her next interview. Her aide asked if she wanted to address it on air. She looked up from the screen, her voice low but certain. "Not yet," she said. First, we find out what's in those files. And who's keeping them sealed. The rally didn't just fill the downtown square. It spilled into side streets, balconies, and rooftops. A sea of faces stretched under the glare of floodlights, winter breath curling into the cold night air. Flags waved, hand-painted signs rose high. Stand with Jasmine. No more silence. Predators fear the light. The air vibrated with a restless electricity, the kind that precedes either a storm or a revolution. When Jasmine stepped onto the stage, the noise swelled to a roar. She waited, letting it wash over her, letting every person there feel the gravity of the moment. Then, with the mic steady in her hand, she began. "Justice is not given," she said, her voice cutting through the crowd like a bell. "It's demanded. It's demanded by the ones who have been ignored, silenced, shamed. And tonight, we say enough." Her words didn't just echo, they landed. Women near the front began telling their stories into open mics passed down the rows. A young mother spoke of being harassed by a local official and never being believed. A retired army sergeant, her voice trembling, said she had been waiting 40 years to hear someone in power speak without fear. The crowd hushed for each voice, then erupted in applause, each testimony fueling the next. Camera cranes swung overhead, capturing the wave of emotion cresting through the square. On giant screens flanking the stage, Jasmine's face alternated with close-ups of the women speaking, tears glistening, jaws clenched, hands gripping microphones like lifelines. In those moments, it stopped being about politics, it was about survival. She closed by turning directly to the cameras broadcasting nationwide. "This fight isn't just about one man, it's about the systems that protect him and others like him. We are here to break that system, brick by brick, truth by truth." Her gaze hardened, the kind that made even the most jaded pundits lean forward. "If they think we'll stop because it's inconvenient for them, they don't know us at all. We will not stop, not now, not ever." The silence before the eruption was almost more powerful than the sound itself. Then, a single voice shouted truth. Another echoed it, and within seconds, thousands were chanting in unison, fists in the air, "Truth, truth, truth." It wasn't just no's, it was a promise, and somewhere, behind closed doors, the people who feared that promise most were already scrambling. The rally was over, but the echoes of truth, still seemed to hang in the night air. Backstage, under the dim glow of a single desk lamp, Jasmine sat alone at a folding table, the roar of the crowd replaced by the quiet scratch of her pen across paper. Her notes were messy, ink smudged from the rush of adrenaline, but each word carried the weight of the night's battle. Outside, police sirens wailed faintly, fading in and out like restless ghosts. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled chants continued, smaller now, but stubborn, refusing to die out, the kind of sound history is made of. Jasmine paused, leaning back in her chair, eyes fixed on the creased photograph lying beside her notepad, a candid shot of her mother holding a protest sign decades ago. She traced the edge of the picture with her thumb, steadying herself. Her voice came in the form of a low, steady voiceover, the kind that doesn't shout to be heard but lingers because it's true. History remembers the ones who speak when it's hardest, when the room turns against them, when the cost is real. It doesn't remember the comfortable, it remembers the brave. She set down her pen and looked toward the stage curtains, where a sliver of cold night air seeped through. Beyond that thin barrier were millions of people watching at home, some cheering, some seething, some uncertain. And she knew every one of them had just been handed a choice. The camera moved closer, catching the flicker of resolve in her eyes. Her hand closed the notebook with a soft thud, as if sealing something more than just paper. She whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for the mic to catch, "They will come harder next time. But so will I." The screen went black, white letters bled in, one at a time. "If you were in that room, would you have stood silent?" The words lingered for a breath too long before fading, leaving only the sound of a heartbeat, slow at first, then faster, louder, until it cut to silence. A silence heavy enough to make the audience feel like the answer wasn't meant for tomorrow, it was meant for right now. True courage isn't about speaking when it's safe, it's about standing firm when the world would rather you sit down. Jasmine's fight reminds us that integrity has a cost, but silence costs far more. In life, we will all face moments where the easy choice is to look away. But history, and our own conscience, will remember whether we stood for what's right, So when your moment comes, will you protect your comfort or will you protect the truth? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.